unapologetic atheist interracial couple's progressive response to the fucking internet.
Hello and welcome to Unapologetics, the unapologetic progressive skeptic's response to the fucking internet. I am Brently.
And I'm Nikki.
And today we have a really great podcast for you here. We have Christy Powell from Secular Sexuality here to hang out. Christy, how you doing, man?
Hey, doing all right. I got to acknowledge that my family spent the entire day sitting out by the pool, and I did that thing where you're like, it's not that hot. We'll be fine. And now I'm like thoroughly dehydrated, thoroughly sunburned, and, at least a little bit drunk. So, like perfect for podcasting, perfect for like saying things that are going to be indelibly inscribed on the internet. Let's ruin a career. Let's have a good time.
Woo! Cancel culture coming.
Well, yeah, you need to be a little uncomfortable, a little drunk. Perfect. We're right there.
Day by the pool. That sounds awesome.
Oh yeah, it does sound nice, actually. Oh my goodness.
So first, thank you so much for being here. So Brent and I are a couple. We've been together for 6 years. Yeah. We both came out as like atheists together. Mm-hmm. And well, he was first, and then I was reluctantly like, I guess I'm not agnostic. Damn.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I was just going to go through the motions, but then you had to make a big fucking thing out of it.
Exactly. I could not let it go.
And I was so happy being my nice little polite self. And so, we realized it's so funny because it's like part of the reason, I'll speak for myself. I'm not in the church. I grew up like in the church somewhat, but it was like off and on, intermittent. But it occurred to me that like I left the church, and I when I started to identify as agnostic, it really didn't have anything to do with like obviously I hated the church's stance on pretty much everything to do with LGBTQIA folks and just, sex before marriage and all this stuff. But it's like, I never really put together how much I actually, how much it imbued in me, conservative sexual beliefs that I have to constantly shake off. And like Brent's the same way, like we're constantly wow, where did that shit come from? Like, what's that about? Why do what's that about? Yeah, so
it's almost automatic for me. I go back to like conservative stuff. I'm like, wait, what am I doing?
What was that? And so when we, watch your show and stuff, we're just like, oh my God, this is such a great show. And it's just, one of the things we're curious about is what made you interested in wanting to talk about sexuality and then wanting to make sure that it was branded as secular and why that's important.
Yeah. So, I mean, so many questions built into that. Fast forward me and tell me where I'm boring you. But I guess the shortest version of the story I can really give you is that I wanted to become a therapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I wanted to do that because I had a tough time coming up as a kid. And I remember just being in high school and being lonely, not understanding the world, and just wishing I had somebody to talk to and wanting to be eventually like a part of the solution in that problem. And then as a therapist, I became more and more fascinated with sexuality as I was like studying to become a therapist, and I'm going through my undergraduate and these different things. I'm beginning to really shake loose from religion, and a huge piece of that was because of homosexuality and the way that Christianity treated homosexuality. And even though at the time I identified as straight, and since then I've thrown a bunch of different adjectives and labels on top of that, I recognized that the way that Christianity treated homosexuals or homosexuality or really just anybody who was different was really, really messy. And so because of that, I got just really interested in wanting to better support people that were not being taken care of by society, folks who were queer or kinky or poly or sex workers or trans or these different folks that, there's nothing inherent about their quote unquote lifestyle or about their orientations or their identities that should make life harder. And yet life often is harder. I mean, you see greater rates of anxiety and depression and suicide and all of these different kinds of things. And the vast majority of that is just because of the way society treats these folks. And so I became more and more passionate about working with that type of person. And then in pursuing that sort of work, I was eventually approached by the ACA. They had already had the idea to put together a show on gender and sexuality. And they eventually teamed up with Dr. Daryl Ray, who had already been doing the Secular Sexuality podcast, but was kind of bored with it, and it was a little bit defunct. And so he was looking to maybe unload that. And so he gave Secular Sexuality to the ACA. And then I honestly think that the atheist community of Austin just typed sex therapist willing to work for free into Google. And they eventually found a colleague of mine who had my name in mind. And that's how I came to become your humble narrator and got involved with Secular Sexuality. I didn't necessarily pick that name or pick that vision, but I have always been passionate about wanting to be on the side of the good, wanting to be a support to folks who are really not well taken care of by our society.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it is a really good show, and it's so cool because it's a call-in show, so like you do have those opportunities to be able to help these people that are calling in with all sorts of questions. It's crazy.
Yeah, and man, we never know what's coming, and we do the show live, and so what the calls that we get, the things that we say, like none of that goes out edited or cleaned up at all. So you're always kind of on the edge of your seat, just really hoping not to do anything stupid.
Right.
And since we have a therapist for an hour, let's get into this. All right.
That's a therapy hour though, right? Like I bill more after the 50-minute mark.
That's it.
There you go.
Okay. So first we wanted to break down like what are some of the things that just like are the things that we learned growing up. Because I think I want to separate, sexuality from the gender roles, because I think both of those are really great conversations, but kind of different. And so the first thing is like, I just remember, because I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I just remember like sex was just not, you just don't talk about it. You don't reference it. It doesn't exist, even though there's children everywhere. But then at the same time, we live in sort of a secular world because Black Christians don't necessarily live in the bubble that white evangelical Christians do. So we're still listening to secular music, which oftentimes have themes of sex.
Very often.
Yes. So it's like this bifurcated world where in one world it's okay to listen to music where it's obviously talking about things. I remember once like being at a family, like it was like Super Bowl or whatever, and it was right when like one of Lil Jon's like Drop It Down Low song came out or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And my entire family like having fun, dropping it down low. But then Sunday we're in the church and everybody's conservative and like living in it, and it's like it created this thing where I felt like, oh, there must be this shame around sex but not. And I don't understand, like, is it once I become an adult, like it's okay, but then I never saw, so it was just so confusing of like, I know sex is important. I know it's something you're supposed to enjoy, but at the same time, like, why doesn't anyone care to like actually talk about it? Why is everyone terrified to sit a teenager down and have a conversation about what it's supposed to be in your life? And then you end up filling in all these blanks along the way with popular media. And that's not always great either.
No, yeah, that can be pretty harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Santa Claus in that sense, because I don't know about y'all, but I don't have a specific memory of like my parents sitting me down and being like, hey, just so you know, we're the ones who have been stuffing your stocking full of Reese's Pieces. Like that was us this whole time. Like I don't remember that ever happening. I just remember watching Miracle on 34th Street and about a million, ABC, TGIF, like family sitcoms or whatever that would have plot lines around like little kids discovering that there was no Santa. And then at the end of the episode, it'd be like, but what if there was? And they would kind of like suspend disbelief in that way. And I just, after having watched like enough of those shows in a row, I started to put together like, wait a second, There are so many shows about how Santa is definitely real. So is he though? And
Right.
when it comes to sexuality, we spend so much time, or at least I did growing up in a very evangelical worldview, in a very conservative Christian world, where we say that sex is great, sex is amazing, sex is always perfect. If you do sex the right way, if you do sex the way that God wants you to do it, it's going to be just magical. And then you hear all of these stories about people who didn't do it the right way and how awful it is. And you would kind of maybe get youth pastors. I've actually been talking to a lot of former evangelicals about this and finding out that apparently this is a way more common experience than just my church, of youth pastors, these like 20 and 30 something year old guys getting up in front of rooms full of high schoolers and talking about sex, basically in terms of, we're not going to talk about it, but you should know that when you have it, when God allows you to have it, when you do it amazing, it's amazing, with like sort of this like body wink wink, like nudge nudge, rib in the elbow kind of situation, as he's like looking at his like beautiful 20 something wife, and all of the high school guys are like, yeah, someday, like I'm gonna have that. And it just, outside of that kind of stage performance conversation, nobody else was really talking about it. Like there were no adults in my life or in the life of any of my peers or anybody else's that were like, yeah, no, Santa Claus is real. Like, it's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. You would only ever hear it in this like prepared speech on stage in front of a crowd kind of thing. And that always had me very curious. Like, if this is such an amazing gift from God, then why are we all so awkward and shy about it? And why is like so much of secular art and culture about how awful or messed up or problematic or difficult or amazing or important or significant? Like, there are just all these adjectives that were being applied by mainstream culture that just weren't being talked about in the culture around me. And that was always terribly baffling, and really pointed to the fact that there was something here that we weren't all being very honest about. And that is maybe the biggest reason that I became like a sex therapist, was I just have that very neurotic brain that as like a 14-year-old was like, somebody is lying to me and I don't know who, and I don't know why or what it's about, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this shit. And, you know, I'm still trying to figure it out, but that's kind of been my mission, is to, I guess, like unveil that whole situation.
You're so right. It does definitely feel like you're being lied to.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's like lies by omission. You know what I mean? Like, because like you said, they'll talk about it on stage, right? But then if any kid's like, hey, you know, coming up to them afterwards, like, hey, remember that stuff you were talking about sex? Everybody looks to the ground. Like,
I would know about that.
Rabble.
When the Lord is ready, he will open.
Yeah, and start kicking rocks and stuff. You know?
And I feel like you had even more of like a specific, because see, that whole like youth pastor thing, I didn't get that, because like Southern Baptist churches don't really have that.
Sure.
You have a main preacher. You may do Sunday school, but still, it's not really like, there's no like cool guy at church. It's just like the pastor.
There's no like the youth communicator badge, like just the like really shitty goatee triangle, like some white guy with like box frames and like spiked hair, and he's like a little bit too old to dress and act the way that he does, but like he's trying to blend in with the high school kid. Yeah, that's like a whole genre of person that I grew up with.
Wild to me.
Oh yeah, and yeah, because we had that, you know, at our, you know, because I was homeschooled and I was completely bubbled in. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody that was not a Christian. You know, I wasn't allowed to go to public school. I wasn't allowed to talk to people from public school. I wasn't allowed to do any of that stuff. So I was
and your media was heavily controlled too.
And the media was heavily controlled. Like, you know, we, you know, only listen to Christian music, only watch Christian movies, only, you know, listen to Christian radio. Like, everything was controlled, you know. So coming out of that, you know, I know that, you know, now that God, you know, that God's not, you know, I'm not convinced that God is real or anything like that. And, you know, all the different things with that, like the LGBTQIA plus, like I'm totally cool with that now. I, of course, before wasn't, because of how I was raised and whatnot. But when it comes to like sex and stuff, it's almost like I automatically avoid the subject. Like I just do. Like I still feel like because I was raised that it's like either sex before marriage is wrong, sex within marriage is right. There's no other nuance. That's
Hell,
it.
even
That's all. We're
masturbation
done.
is
We're
wrong.
done.
Like,
Oh,
you even had to
absolutely,
do
yeah.
a masturbation pledge.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I used to get a phone call every day to check and see if I had masturbated that day.
Oh,
No,
I mean, I wasn't planning on broadcasting this, but like I remember even at a very, very young age, all of my masturbation fantasies involved like a quick scene at the very beginning where me and the object of my affection would get married. Like I remember at like a super young age, like having to like, oh yeah, that's got to be part of the fantasy because we wouldn't want this jerk off fantasy to get into inappropriate territory. That would be super wrong.
That is the most wholesome.
It's like it's like when
I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's like when you lie to somebody, but you make like they tell you that you did something wrong, and like you did the thing wrong, but you make it not as bad.
Yes.
Like no, I did like
it.
do the thing, like not at that bad, but I did do this, even though you did the real bad thing. You're just
so
like
what are some of the things to like start walking yourself out of these just like these automatic, because that's what they're just automatic tropes in your head of like, okay, if it's in this context, it's wrong. So like, I think we've gotten pretty much to the place where, because we're obviously, I identify as queer, he identifies as pan, which is another conversation we're going to have, because we watched one of your shows and I thought it was so interesting. We should talk about that.
Oh yeah.
Because I really wonder like what the difference is. Like, I mean, there basically isn't one, but like why we chose different words. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, the issue that I have is like, I'll find myself, like, let's say I'm reading something on, Reddit or whatever, and someone's talking about behavior where they felt like they needed to have sex with a lot of people to figure something out or whatever. And in my mind, I'm automatically just like, well, that's not healthy. And I'm like, but wait, why? Like, if this person protected themselves and they felt like this is what they needed to do to figure some shit out, what is it about having sex a lot that automatically in my mind is like, oh, that can't be good for you? Like, literally, sex is a safety issue. And it's like breaking those two things apart is really difficult. And I think media goes into that too, because so much of women's behavior is like, don't do that thing because that is a safety issue. And the way that we treat sex workers in general, like breaking apart that like it can be safe and fine is really difficult sometimes.
Right.
Well, and it's such a weird regression towards the mean, because if you're not talking about, particularly religious media, and we're just talking about what are the top 40 songs on the radio, what are the, top 10 shows on CBS or whatever the hell, you get into this weird space where it's like the vast majority of the audience is not particularly uncomfortable, not particularly challenged by ideas around gender or sexuality. Not to say that America doesn't have a lot of fucking weird sexual hangups and stuff, because we certainly do. But even if, like, philosophically, politically, most of the people watching are on board, you don't want to lose your audience. You don't want to miss out on 10% of your potential advertising dollars or whatever else. And so we skew things towards that much more neurotic, much more anxious type of worldview. And then the rest of us are all sitting on the outside going, well, maybe we should be more anxious. Maybe we end up picking up and soaking up some of that. And even if we don't necessarily share those values, they are just in the air that we're breathing. They're in the water that we're drinking. And so we all walk around feeling a little bit nervous, a little bit uncomfortable about our sexuality, because we are, having that told to us by popular media that we're supposed to feel uncomfortable.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think too, and to touch on the gender roles thing, I think too, as far as being a girl and raised in sex was always something you give to a boy as like reward for security. Yeah. And so seeing those stories where that tete-a-tete didn't happen, it's like, well, you're giving away the milk for free. It's like, what the fuck? Why would we teach little girls that? That is the weirdest thing in the world.
Well, I remember them teaching it like it was using the chewed gum thing.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard about that? Yeah, you know what I'm
chewed
talking
gum
about.
or a
that's
crumpled
disgusting.
up flower or put the toothpaste back into the tube or
Oh, yeah.
all of these metaphors that completely neglect the fact that sex gets better the more you have it. I mean, Jesus Christ. Anybody over the age of like 25 who has not yet discovered that especially the female orgasm is much, 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 much easier to achieve on like number 17 versus number 4.
Right.
Like, you should clearly understand that this is not a resource that gets used up.
Yes, especially when you look at that data that shows that lots of teenage and young women are just not satisfied when it comes to like heterosexual relationships. And yet you still keep doing it. You know what I mean? Like but at the same time, you don't know how to advocate for your own pleasure because that's not seen as ladylike. That's not seen as something you do. It's just boys are supposed to automatically know how to please you because that's what they've been told their whole life. It's so good. It's so great. You're going to know exactly what you're doing. And you don't fucking know what you're doing.
Most guys.
Like you figure that stuff out with good partners, which, you know, that's the next question. Like, it feels like you're not even being coached on like what questions to ask. Well, I can't recall one single conversation where an adult was like, hey, if you're not happy in your sex life, here are some things that you can say or do or whatever to like, that's just not a concern. Like, It's just 100% your business. You figure it out.
Yeah.
And to find out that people are suffering for years in the worst sexual relationships, it just feels so like, why do we do this to ourselves? You know?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a odd thing that, you know, people, because there's this weird like we don't want to talk about it thing. You know, it keeps us from, you know, and you know, being able to dive into stuff like that with just like your friends. Like I remember that was like a big thing, you know, almost like it was like American Pie when that came out, that movie, you know, and like they were asking each other about sex and stuff, and they're like, these are teenagers in high school and stuff, right? But it's sad that they have to go through that, you know what I mean? That they have to turn to the, you know, the one girl that's from Orange Is the New Black, and who knew about this stuff. You got to go.
You got to ask a band geek, or you have to like have Blink 182 watching your webcam in order to get like any insights into how human sexuality operates. Like, no, it's a little ridiculous. I mean, if you think about the segments of our culture that are dedicated to teaching each other basic decorum, how to be polite, how to communicate, how to get a job, how to have a conversation without sounding like an idiot, and like the different ways that we socialize one another, and then take this incredibly important aspect of the way that mammals socialize, the way that social species like Homo sapiens are meant to interact, or the way that we have evolved to connect with one another. And then you say, not only are we not going to talk about it, but we're going to make sure you know that it's fucking weird when you want to talk about it and make you feel so shitty for that. It's just madness.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's always just meant for like joking. And it's just like, once the joke's made, then it's over. Everybody stop talking. Don't get serious about it now. It's just meant for punchlines. That's it. You know.
And it was like particularly hard for you. I don't know if you wanted to talk about, you know, how your process of coming out and figuring out your stuff, because you had a much more traumatic religious background than I did.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, like, what would you say, like, are just some, I don't know, just some like 101 type of stuff. There's just like the basics of what somebody like that was coming out of religion, like a newly deconverted atheist, and like what they would you know, want to, that someone that had like that very rigid upbringing, you know, what advice would you give those people as to how to kind of address sex and stuff like that?
Yeah, you know, there's not a simple answer to that question by any means, or at least not a good simple answer. But I think for me, with a little bit of hindsight, what I have recognized as the biggest challenge, or the thing to really wrap my mind around, is the simple fact that there is no universal, this is how it should be, this is how it's supposed to be. There is no God who is keeping track of what you do. There is no perfect plan for your life. There is nothing that you are supposed to be doing. There is no roadmap here. There is simply what you're doing and some ways that you could do it that are going to increase your happiness, your peace, your joy, your love, your romance, your connection, your eroticism. Like, there are things that are going to make your life more enjoyable. And then there are things that are going to make your life less enjoyable, things that are going to make you feel more anxious and more uncomfortable or more whatever else. And just recognizing that whether we want to get into these like long, detailed conversations about the source of morality and the value of moral ethics and determinism and free will and all of these things, like gently putting that in a box for just a moment. If you're just coming out of religion, I would say to you that your sexuality just is. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not better than it could be or should be or is supposed to be. It's not worse than it should be. There's no quota. There's no counting. There's no metric here. It just is. Your sexuality just is, and you don't owe it to anybody, not even yourself, to change that. But if you wanted to, you could probably put a little time, energy, effort, and focus on your sexuality, and you would feel better. And so if you want to make that investment will likely pay off. There's no quota. There's nothing that you have to do here. There's nothing that you need to do here. But just remember that your whole life, whether you realize it or not, you have likely believed some version of the idea that God has a perfect plan for your life and that your sexuality is always either squarely within God's perfect plan or some degree of differentiation from that, some degree of worse than it's supposed to be. And I would just tell you to get all of that masturbating out of your vocabulary. You don't need to do anything. There's nothing you must do. There's nothing you should do. There's just you, your body, and the things that you choose to enjoy. And so you can do whatever the hell you want to do and know that your choices may make you more happy or less happy, but that's about it. That's about as far as it goes in terms of what you should do or what you need to do.
Right.
I think that's so,
Yeah.
that's very impactful. And I think too, for me, one of the things I've been working on is just like, getting rid of all that judgment that's there. Cause I think that's one of the things like religion teaches us really well is how to instantly judge a situation as good or bad or unsafe or healthy or whatever.
Or what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do.
And
Yeah.
it's so wild because I grew up not having any judgment against LGBT plus communities like at all. Like I don't know why, but my mom was like religious, but also very liberal and open and inclusive. And so I just never got those messages. But at the same time, like messages regarding heterosexual sex and its relation, tons of judgment there, tons of slut shaming, tons of like, what we talked about earlier. Yeah. So it's like understanding that you're just like selectively applying judgment to things. Why are you doing that? Like what is that about?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And why do we fixate on verses in the Bible about homosexuality, for instance, versus obsessing over verses in the Bible about the proper ways to like blend fabrics? Like, why is it that people are willing to stand up and protest? Why are people willing to strip away the rights of people? Why are people willing to murder human beings over these like scraps of ancient poetry? And then we can go into that same book and say like, well, what about this random scrap of poetry about how you should stone people for, cutting their hair short or whatever else? Oh, well, the Old Testament, God doesn't really like, fuck you. If we're basing our system of governance on a bunch of ancient poetry, then we should at least do that instead of this like cherry-picked half-assed version of that.
Oh yeah, I was just watching, or I just read something where it was some politician, and I can't remember the specifics, but they were like, transgenderism is an abomination, and then they quoted Deuteronomy, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Deuteronomy? You know what else is in Deuteronomy?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, are you kidding me? Like, that's the way, that's where you went, you know. But it's almost, and they're like you said, they're fine with quoting that, but like, if you go to like Exodus 21, you know, where it's like talking about slavery and stuff. Oh, well, Jesus died, so we don't have to follow the Old Testament. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, why are you following it for this thing and not that thing? You know, it's just it's so obnoxious,
It is.
so inconsistent.
I think I'm gonna switch subjects a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Go on. No, we were going to talk about the pan versus
yeah.
queer, right?
So
Yeah.
first, happy Pride.
Yay.
Woo!
And and so we were it's so funny because I have, before Brent and I were even ever in a relationship, I was open as a queer woman, and it just always seemed like a apt descriptor for me. And then Brent, once he started to really figure out, you know, after like being honest about his history and like integrating all of your identities, was like, oh, I'm pansexual. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about what have you noticed, or maybe a difference in these labels, if there is any, because when we talk about what it means to us, it seems to be the same thing, which is attraction, not, you know, conforming to a gender.
Right.
But nevertheless, there are multiple words. So
because I will use the word queer too, but that's sort of like all encompassing. If you like want to know like more about how I am queer, I will say that I'm pansexual, right? So I'll still use that word as a blanket.
Queer is kind of that substitute for LGBTQIA++, you know, whatever else we want to add in there. Yeah, I mean, I hear that. And the truth is, we could sit down, and there's certainly podcasts that do this, and there's value in that, and I appreciate that. But we could sit down and do the version of this conversation where we really look at the etymology of these words, and we discuss their like Latin origins, and we discuss their usage over time, and we have these like meaningful, nuanced conversations in which we work out the denotation and the specific meaning of each specific individual word. And that would be a useful conversation. But I'm a therapist. Like, as much as I appreciate and value philosophy, and I like listening to these people go on about the kalam and the presuppositional argument for the existence of God, and you know, they sound like computer programmers as they go through all of their logical premises and they break these things down. As a therapist, my question is always, okay, but so what? What do humans do with this? Like, what would an actual person do with this information? And when we talk about the difference between being queer or bisexual or pansexual or these different terminologies, I'm way less interested in what these words are supposed to mean, or how they are supposed to work, or what they break down as, or what they were created to mean. I'm only interested in how people are actually using them. I'm only interested in what kind of information is being communicated. Like when the vocal cords, these tiny, I actually just learned this myself. The human vocal cord, I think, is like about 1.5 centimeters in most women and about 2 centimeters in most men.
Wow. What? Really?
Yeah.
That's tiny.
So if you think about how tiny this muscle is, and the importance of it, like the fact that we can get, you know, everybody from, you know, Mr. Bean to Benedict Cumberbatch to Ella Fitzgerald, like everybody has these different vocal cords, and they are really just these tiny, insignificant muscles that are slightly structured just a little bit differently. And the way that we express ourselves using these tiny muscles is amazing to me. So thank you for letting me go off on that tangent. I know I'm getting too far away from your question.
No, I love it. That's awesome.
I love it.
But the point that I'm trying to make here is that the whole reason we have vocal cords is because it allows us as a species to co-regulate and to communicate and express information back and forth. And so for that reason, I don't care what word you use. I don't care where that word came from. I don't care about its origins. I'm enough of a nerd that I would love to geek out with you about it. But in terms of what actually matters as a human being, all I want is for you to be able to take whatever is alive inside of you, inside of your mind, your body, your soul, or however we want to conceptualize as you talking as a speaker, and how you can communicate information to me. So therefore, when we talk about the difference between like being bisexual or pansexual, to me, it's all about who are you talking to? Because, you know, I navigate in all these different spaces where I, as a therapist, I have these like 40 or 50 people that are meeting with me on a regular basis to talk about the intimate aspects of their life. And I have a relationship with each of them, and I have at least some sense of what is the vocabulary like for this person versus that person. And it's not just their demographics. It's not just how old they are or where they grew up or their education or anything like that. It's a relationship in which I have a vague sense of what kind of words do they like to use? What does their language look like? What is their, you know, default setting on their language profile? And so when I choose a word to communicate an idea, it's based on that information. And when I use a word like pan, I am likely kind of signaling to somebody who is in that community that, hey, yeah, I'm hip with like the new lingo, and I get that. And when I use a word like bisexual, whether I mean it to mean somebody who is attracted to both men and women, or whether I use it in a more encompassing way to say anybody who is attracted to more than one gender, however they define that, I am signaling to them like I see the version of you that wants to share these ideas with me, that wants to co-regulate with me, that wants to sync up in this conversation with me right now. So I know that that's kind of a very long and sanctimonious and overly elaborate non-answer, but I honestly don't care what these words mean or how people use them. I just want in each individual conversation, when I express an idea by like taking these tiny little muscles in my throat and making them vibrate in these weird ways, I want to make those muscles vibrate in such a way that you understand me better and that you connect with me better. And so that is as far as those words that's as far as any words for me really go. And these are sensitive words because there are people who are dying for these labels, for these adjectives. There are people who are having rocks thrown at them while people shout these adjectives at them, and when people shout slurs at them. And there are high schoolers and folks in their 70s that are getting on their phones and are seeing one of these words explained to them with some meme or some comic or some new metaphor, and are all of a sudden smiling and recognizing themselves in them and having that experience of being seen and felt and understood in a new way. And I don't care what the shape of the letters in the word are. I don't care what the specific vibrations in your vocal cords are. I'm just about that experience of being seen and understood in those ways.
That's a great, I mean, I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it. And I think that's important because one of the things I'm seeing is this sort of pushback against the diversity of words being used. Like, why can't you just be gay? Why can't you just be a lesbian? You know, now like people are starting to understand what IMBY is and understand that exists. And it's like, we have another word now. Why do we need another word? And it's just,
yeah, I get that it can be exhausting, and we can walk through the history of why it's exhausting, but also it's fine. It's fucking
exactly
fine. Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. Like, we're humans, we can handle this, we can do this. And furthermore, if it's not you and it's not your specific community, why the fuck do you care? Like, just let people go through their self, you know, actualization however they need to. And so that brings me to, I guess, that because I think that sort of exhaustion, I guess, with, you know, having to pay attention to words and things changing, it brings me to, I think, a lot of what we've been seeing on the internet, especially around this month with Pride this year, is like this desire to tell like the LGBT plus community to just like calm down. Like, just like,
Mhm.
yeah, you can fly your flag. Yeah, you can have your parade, but can you just like not? Can you just like wanting to take some of the radicalization, it looks like to me, out of the entire meaning of the
Oh
month.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ, this like bullshit fake talking point about whether or not kink belongs in Pride
Yes.
Yeah.
is just such a version of that. Like, yeah, be queer, but like don't be proud of it. Just like,
Yes.
you know, sure, wear your rainbows or whatever, but try not to be so bright about it. Like just
Yes.
shut
Right.
up and stand out of the way. Yeah, it's a little infuriating.
It's so infuriating. And I wonder if, and it's like, as more and more, radical queer folks are just like, look, the corporatization is great. We all need money. But at the same time, like, this is it something that's making it so mainstream that like there's no space anymore for us to just grow and be and understand what it means to be a part of the community and be celebrating Pride together.
Right.
And I think the communities are doing a great job of saying, hey, there's room for all of us. So we're going to do this on this day, and we're going to do that on that day, and we're going to do this on this day. But then you just have, I feel like, all of these folks that are, I don't even know that they're a part of the community, to be honest. They're just
Right.
people on the
Well,
internet.
exactly. It could just be troll, like, people trolling and shit.
I mean,
Just-
I have seen a lot of queer folks get roped into it, and it's
Ugh,
it's aggravating. So, like as a therapist, I often bill myself as being, particularly working with the poly community, and so I'll have a lot of folks come to me because they are something in a version of non-monogamy, and so often these folks will be like a cishet couple that is Mormon and that is like wanting to figure out and make space for themselves and find like a way to like lift the fence so that they can have a non-monogamous relationship while still, maintaining their faith and their religion and their access to their culture and all of these things. But never want to like question why there's a fence in the first place. Like we're just looking to cut a hole in it. We're just looking to make a little bit of space for ourselves. And I feel like after so much work and effort to find liberation, after the Obergefell decision and the widespread acceptance, the increased widespread acceptance, I should say, of gay marriage, I feel like there are a lot of very straight-laced gay folks that are like, we did it. Like, equal rights. We're done.
Listen, you are speaking a word right now.
Yeah,
it is
I get it. But, there's more work to be done. Like, Pride was never about making sure that rich, white, gay dudes could marry each other legally. Like, yes, that was on the agenda. And yes, I'm glad that that's a thing. But that is not why Marsha P. Johnson was hurling bricks. Like, there is more fucking work to be done. And if you're not willing to continue that work and you want to see Pride as a way of like taking your, corporate money and putting your feet up, you're really missing out on the mission that continues to need to be done.
I will never forget. We like to watch, Vice vignettes. And there's one reporter who was speaking about why it was she grew up in an evangelical Christian environment, and she very much wanted to find a church that she could, basically get married in, her and her partner, and have some of the same experiences. And it was almost impossible to find a church that was affirming. And to her, it just meant, okay, I just got to keep looking. But it was like, but don't you see, like, the bubble that you grew up in that created that is purposely excluding you. It's not that it's hard to find. It's that it's literally not congruent with what you grew up believing. And it's hard. And I completely understood, because it's that culture is hard to walk away from, because it's that you have so many great experiences, but it's just kind of like, I don't know how you can't get to the next step, that it's not just like, I don't know. To me, I just feel like once you come out, you have to start breaking down, or you should at least start breaking down these systems that have kept you in the closet for so long, because they're still there. They still exist. And if you're going to engage in them, then what are you changing? What are you doing differently? Because if it means you can be there, but then they won't allow you to be in leadership, or, you know, your kids are going to be ostracized in some way, or any of these other things, then what is it all for? Like, if it's just to affirm you, what about everybody else?
And there's so many great communities to be a part of, you know, that
are not evangelical. Yeah.
Right. Or made up of ex-evangelicals. Like, that's why I've like found such a great family, like within, you know, the atheist community. Because I'm like, I'm talking to people and they're like, oh yeah, I listened to DC Talk growing up too, man. This is great. Like, this is cool because, you know, I got all these things in common, but we both have like stepped out of the religious part of it. But it's a great community. There's still like really good people and everything, you know, and it's, unless it's like a UU church or Episcopalian, maybe. You know, it's
but
really
those don't
hard
have
to find.
those feelings, right? Like, those are completely like culturally different
Yeah.
from, you know, white evangelical bubbles. Like that, it's a very specific way of growing up. And it's hard to recreate that, especially if you like, because so much of it is about, like, for example, here, like Chick-fil-A is such a big deal of like everywhere. It's just such a big deal at all the churches. And it's like, why even engage in that in some kind of way where you think you can get back or give back? I don't know. But that's, I mean, I get people have to go through that process, but
that's the whole reason. It's like, oh, you guys don't like gay people either? Cool. Let's support this business.
It absolutely is that. But it's like,
nobody's having this conversation because of how good their chicken is. Like,
absolutely.
I'm so sick of that argument. If like, okay, sure, fine. You don't give a shit about ethical consumerism. Like, you don't care. You're lazy. They have chicken that you like, and you don't give a shit. Fine. Okay. Be that person. You know, we sell diamonds that way. We sell, you know, plenty of clothes that way. Like, all right, fine. But I know that if that was truly what was going on, we wouldn't have to talk about it. You wouldn't be bringing it up. Like, I know I don't bring it up. Like, I don't go out of my way to tell people to not eat at Chick-fil-A. And yet people bring it up to me all the time. And it's not because they think that the chicken is that goddamn good. Like, I'm so sick of that argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally 2 pieces of bread with a piece of chicken and a pickle.
An unseasoned piece of chicken,
An
by the way.
Unseasoned, soggy. Yeah.
Unseasoned piece of chicken. But yeah, so I guess we're gonna start wrapping up here. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. But one of the things we like to do with our guests is sort of get an idea of some of the stuff that they're into outside of their calling. So tell us a little bit about your nerd self. How do you nerd out? How do you take care of yourself after a long day of, you know, doing great work?
You know what? You caught me on a day where I have to answer that question honestly. I guess the nerdiest thing, if I'm talking about how I nerd out, I have recently started taking lessons in Japanese tea ceremonies. I don't even know how to talk about this. Like, this is the weirdest thing. This is the weirdest part of my life so far by a long shot. Like, I'm the sex therapist, and I think people all have these assumptions about the types of parties I go to or whatever. That shit is boring. Like, I don't do anything interesting. So the weirdest thing about me, I guess, is recently I've started taking lessons in Japanese tea ceremonies, which is basically this like incredibly elaborate, overly ritualized, remarkably like mindful and intentional way of literally just sitting down and having a cup of tea with a guest. You know, if it's traditional when people come over to like offer them a drink and you sit down and you talk, this is just a way of doing that where literally every aspect, like every single motion, every movement of your hands has been properly optimized and scripted so that you can have like the absolute, you know, ultimate experience. So that's a very weird thing I've recently been trying to figure out or get into, but otherwise I do a lot of hiking and camping. My partner and I just got back from Big Bend out in West Texas, and we had a couple of days of hiking out there, and we had one day like all set aside to go on this like 12-mile high elevation change in the desert, like grueling hike.
That's real hiking right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the real deal.
I mean, so this was our second attempt on that same course. We tried last year and it was too hot. We did it for about 3 hours and we decided not to go the whole route and to go back and try again. So this year we go out and we're all ready for it. We get out there super early before it's terribly hot, and about an hour into our hike, we see a like a brown bear on the path. And we talked about it, and I was like, I'm sure we're fine. Let's just give it a half an hour. Let's let him wander on, and then we'll go. And he kind of wanders off the path, and we keep going. And we run into 2 more bears. And my partner is like freaking out, like we need to leave. And I'm like, oh, come on. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. It's fine. And I say that, by the way, the bears were not afraid of us. They did not give a shit about us. But like we're standing there and I'm trying to convince her, like, it's only 3 bears. Like, how bad? Like, it's only 3. And while we're standing there, somebody walks up and was like, yeah, we saw like 2 more bears over that next hill. We're going home. Yeah. And so we decided, like, okay, so we'll leave. And we get ready to leave. We walk back out to the car. We ended up seeing like 5 more bears total. It was just ridiculous. So yeah,
bear season. Jeez.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable. And my favorite part was that the road was shut down. Like the road to get into the park was under construction, and so you could only use it at certain times of day. So when we got out there for like our 12-mile hike, like we were ready to be committed to the project. Right. But now we're stuck. So like it's not the case that we were like hiding out in our car for safety, but like also we didn't really want to wander too far from our car because there were goddamn bears everywhere.
Oh man.
Yeah, that sounds like, because we like to hike here in Florida, but it's not nearly that serious. Like it's very flat.
Alligators.
Yeah, can you hike in Florida? Like walking around a swamp, is that the same thing?
That is our biggest threat, is the just like errant alligators everywhere. Yeah. So like certain like right now, the summer months is not a great idea to go deep into the swamps because they are not happy. They don't want us around. Right. They're constantly sunning. It's not good.
Season
yeah,
stuff,
it's
right?
season.
Yeah. So we get the alligator attacks go way up during the summer.
Yeah.
And a lot of the places that we go, though, they're up on these boardwalks, so you're actually pretty safe.
Yeah,
and it's actually kind of cool because you kind of want to run into them because you can see them from a safe distance.
Yeah, you see some of that in East Texas, out in like Big Thicket area, and I mean they're amazing creatures. Like to think that they have evolved into this, up until the advent of humanity, this like perfect and unneeded to be changed type of dimension. It's just remarkable.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's always fun. Like we just saw a bunch of 4 dolphins or something, 3 or 4 dolphins.
Oh wow!
That were right on the bay wall. Like we went to this park and we were just walking, and it literally was like less than a foot from the bay wall, so you could almost reach out and touch it. Yeah, it was amazing.
We're very lucky.
Yeah,
I think wildlife. It's so funny because we Texas and Florida, it almost feels like we're cousins in some messed up way. Like I feel like we both have like leaders that are questionable,
crazy,
but the damn states are so gorgeous. It's like it's so hard to leave. It's like it's like I hate Florida, I gotta get out, and then I go for a walk and it's like dolphins right there,
right? Yeah. It's like politically you're like we got to get out of here, but then like nature wise it's like never mind, we got to stay.
Why is all the good nature held by Republican governors? I don't understand why that worked out that way.
What is that? They're trolling us. That's what's happening. They're trolling us. But anyway, please tell us how our listeners, how they can look you up and see some of the great stuff that you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I am a therapist under the name Valence Counseling. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube under that name. But more importantly, I would encourage people to check out Secular Sexuality. Secular Sexuality is a program put out by the atheist community of Austin. We're on the Atheist Experience Network. So if you are familiar with things like the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen, names like Matt Dillahunty and some of these amazing folks, we are all part of that organization. And every Thursday night at 7 o'clock Central Time, we do a live episode of Secular Sexuality, where I usually get to interview some amazing creator or educator or activist in the world of gender and sexuality. Just this week, I got to speak to a amazing porn studio owner and creator and performer, and we were talking about how lesbian porn kind of suffers from the male gaze and from the idea that like lesbian porn is actually for men in a lot of ways. And those are the types of conversations that we have every week, but we also get live user calls where folks call in to ask questions like, should I describe myself as bisexual or should I describe myself as pansexual, and which adjective works for me, and how do I tell my mom that I am bi and or pan, and all of these great kinds of things, talking about the intersection of religion and sexuality. We would love to hear from you. I hope that folks will check it out.
Awesome.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love it. We really enjoy those shows. I like just about all the ACA shows. I love college shows. I don't know what
that.
It's
Our YouTube, as soon as you pull it up on the TV, is like usually always Matt's face, and then like followed by all the other ACA shows down the line. Yeah,
maybe a Sam Cedar is in there at some point. But mostly ACA. But so we have this sign off, right? And we're gonna try to time it as best we can. But so what we do is I'm going to say who we say fuck off to, and then we all three together try to say fuck off at the same time.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. All right, here we go. So what do we say to the haters, discriminators, and masturbators shamers?
Fuck
off!
Yes!